and I'm willing to put it right out there. So if you're willing to have that much judgment, I'm willing to throw it right back at you. Wango, you know? And that's what we got to be able to do, because there is that much judgment in the world. You are who you are. You are exactly designed to be who you are. And your ownership of it is what shuts them down and shuts them up, when you own it. And that's what we facilitated in here, is your ability to own it right back, because you finally got words. Because if Diane didn't have the words, and somebody said, sorry, not seeing uglies, what would you do? You would freeze and die. Fortunately, she's been acting long enough that she didn't die. You know, if she'd been a year into it, she probably would have quit acting, moved away from New York, and hung herself. You know, fortunately, well, you know, don't you know people who have quit just because it hurts so much? Right? Fortunately, she was beyond that, but she also had a way to say, I know what you're saying, and I'm cool with it, so could you just shut up and let me act? All right. Before we get to Sarah Palin, I also want to mention to you the effect of being yourself, because it can be world-changing. As all of you know, we lost, sorry. I don't know why it tears me up to realize we lost Walter Cronkite, but for me, he was a whole part of my life. Some of you who are younger you didn't experience him every night. But I did. And I did in the days when there wasn't cable news. You know, there were the networks. And Walter Cronkite was one of them, and he was arguably the best of them. And, you know, he was Uncle Walter. You know, he's the guy that told you news. Back in the days that the evening news was news. It wasn't feature stories about, you know, real estate booms and how to whip cream. It was news. And he was a hardcore journalist newsman, and he was brilliant at broadcast journalism. He helped invent how we do it. And it's a sad thing that he's gone, although he lived to be 93, and God bless him. In 1963, I was 15 years old. And a few years before that, when I was 12, I'd gone through my first political campaign and realized, just starting, you know, beginning an adult life at 12, you know, the prologue to an adult life, 12, 13, I realized that I had political opinions and that I cared about this election, and I got really involved, and my dad brought home a campaign button from the campaign headquarters that was in his office building, and, you know, I was a Kennedy supporter. And President Kennedy was elected, and that alone was a huge change. We, in modern times, there had never been a president quite like that, because everybody else had been kind of these great old guys. But here was Jack Kennedy, who was alive and 43 years old, and, you know, it was just a different kind of thing, and the whole country felt it, rather like it's a different kind of thing right now. And the nation really felt it because it was the first time. We've had some sort of revolutionary presidents, like an actor who became the president of the United States. We've had some presidents that were unexpected. But Kennedy was the first in modern times. It was really out of the blue that somebody that young, etc. So it was exciting. And a few years later, as you all know, that ended. And probably, if you were watching TV this weekend about Walter Cronkite, you saw the clip. Because Walter Cronkite is there in his shirt sleeves, which was not allowed on television. But news was happening, and he is there. The bulletin is handed to him that the president has been declared dead. About 36, 7 minutes after he was actually dead, they finally released the news. And, you know, CBS News got the first thing. It's called the 5 bell. When the UP wire, things used to come across the ticker on the UP and the Associated Press wire, and the machines that feed the news would ring with bells to tell you how important the story was that was coming over, so the editors in these news offices would know whether to go right to the machine or it's just another story. And a 5-bell story was a major story. It only happened like twice a year that 5 bells went off. So 5 bells go off the President's Day. And Cronkite is there waiting, as everybody was, by the machine, rips it off, and immediately goes, "Put me on the air." And they had to bring cameras in, because in those days they didn't have news studios. They brought the cameras in to the newsroom. They brought the cameras in, and he reads it, and a lot of you saw it on TV. In the middle of it, he reads it. Sorry. And he takes off his glasses and says, "The president's dead." And he choked up, not nearly as much as I am right now recounting it. He chokes up just enough that you can barely hear it in his voice. Goes on, the news of those 4 days was solid. Those of you who are alive may remember, it was solid. There was nothing else. And the President of the United States had been murdered. And then his assassin was murdered. And then, you know, it was nuts for 4 days. Plus, we were, you know, on the brink of maybe war with the Soviet Union and with Cuba, and now the president was dead, and people didn't know if the Russians had done it or if it had happened internally, and the whole country could have just crumbled. It's a closer call than we've ever had since. And for 4 days it went on, plus there's a major state funeral, and, you know, people are coming from all over the world, and literally leaders from everywhere come walking through the streets of Washington. It was huge, and there's this young widow and little kids. And for, you know, a 15-year-old kid that thought, oh, you know, the promise of a nation, you know, and it was all snatched. And you really realized, you know, I got a real adult lesson. This is how quickly things can change and things can end. And it's a lesson that's been part of my life ever since. And I think it served that for the country. You know, we never, that kind of thing hadn't happened. That it could all just... After this moment when Walter Cronkite cracked a tiny bit, just got a frog in his throat and just barely teared up, there was a major opinion rush underneath all this funeral stuff that he should be taken off the air. That was the general opinion. Well, you can't have a guy that sweet. We can't trust him if he cries. We can't trust him if he can't hold on to his emotions. Because that was the standard in the world. If you were a man and we trusted you, you didn't crack. Well, Walter Cronkite cracked. He was himself in a moment where it was unavoidable. He was a pretty solid guy. And yet, here was this young man shot. And it affected him. And he inadvertently, he didn't want to let it show, I guarantee you, but it did. It did. And that was the reaction in this country. Take the fool off the air. Now, today, presidents cry. We don't take them out of office. We don't call for them to be removed. We expect it. Men are allowed to do that. We're even kind of encouraged to do that. Walter Cronkite changed that. One person being himself in a moment that he couldn't control changed the ethos of the world. Suddenly, men had permission. Uncle Walter choked up. I guess I can. And you guys don't know that because you have permission to cry in a movie and choke up if you want, if you're moved to do that. Walter Cronkite did that for you because if you'd lived 40 years ago, you weren't allowed to do that. It was not possible. And because men couldn't show that kind of emotion, there was a lot of other emotions they couldn't show also. And that's why families grew up in a certain way, where they were bereft of any kind of real feeling from fathers. because it was culturally built in.